know me, can't hear me? Stay closer. Okay. Can you hear me now? Close. Very close. Okay. For everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Roger's older brother. I want to thank you all for coming here today to remember and honor Roger. I also want to welcome all the friends and family members who could not be here in person, but who are viewing this celebration of Roger's life online. And I want to say a special thank you to my sister Carol, who couldn't be here. She helped to write the eulogy, along with input from family members and especially from Shana. So we appreciate that. Well, Roger was a truly unique individual. He once said his favorite song was Frank Sinatra's "I Did It My Way." And he certainly did live his life that way. He was unconventional, but he always remained true to himself and the path that he had mapped out for himself. From the time he got his first chemistry set for Christmas, Roger was a scientist. His brain was always working. He had many scientific interests and was usually working on many ideas at the same time, with the goal of changing the world. He had over 100 patents, and he was working on even more patents at the time of his death. He also had an early interest in progressive political issues. While still in high school, he was instrumental in getting a recycling center going long before they were common. He tested the water quality of Silver Creek, documented who was emptying their sewage directly into the creek, and he got that changed. His interest in science and public policy combined in one memorable incident when he spoke in front of the city council. Before he arrived, he had unknowingly splashed acid on his pants while he was doing an experiment. While he waited to speak, the acid started to eat holes in his trousers. Despite the fact that his pants were starting to disintegrate, he got up to speak anyway. Apparently it was a drafty walk home. But embarrassment did not stop Roger. He never really closed the door on anyone or any possibility. That's probably because the trait that set Roger apart more than anything else. Most people develop a shell to protect themselves, but he never did. He kept childlike openness all of his adult life. It was the essence of his charm and sometimes the cause of his difficulties. He trusted virtually everyone. One of his friends tells a story about the first time he met Roger at church. Although they'd never laid eyes on each other before, Roger asked him to get his wallet off the back of the wheelchair and take some money out for the offering. And how many of us would ask a stranger to open our wallets? Other times, Roger's ex would send Roger out in his wheelchair with a cookie on his chest. He simply stopped complete strangers and asked them if they would give him a bite. Not only did they help him, but many became friends. Roger believed in other people's kindness, and most people rose to the occasion. In a way, he sort of held a mirror up to those he met, showing by the way they responded to his vulnerability, where their own hearts and integrity were. He met some wonderful people that way, who enriched his life as they were quickly adopted into his wide circle of friends. Even with ALS, he had a more active social life than many able-bodied people do. Of course, his openness wasn't confined to people. Most of us learn to talk ourselves out of ideas if they don't seem feasible or practical. Roger did not. He kept his imagination open to possibilities in a way that most don't. He could easily have talked himself out of opening the first vegetarian restaurant for miles around in Kent, Ohio. After all, what did he and Barb and Gail know about running a restaurant? But he didn't talk himself out of it, and in fact, pushed others forward until the Red Radish was born. The same thing happened when he ran for the Senate in Wisconsin. He had worked on the McGovern campaign, so he knew a little bit about running for office, but he didn't have a name that people recognized, and he had little money. He was not deterred. Animated by his lifelong interest in environmentally friendly public policy, he ran as a Green Republican. Though he lost, he accomplished his goal of putting environmental solutions on the radar screen of the state. The willingness to entertain any possibility led to some great inventions. Perhaps the most notable, the L pipe and the ballistic breaker, which grew out of his interest in building a better electrical grid. He also patented a green burial technique and continued to work on his book, Inventing Tomorrow. Lately, his ideas centered on ventilators. One, a vest to help people like himself breathe. Another, inspired by the pandemic, to increase ventilator access while lowering the cost for hospitals. Of course, there were some less than great ideas too. For years, a bottle of nitroglycerin that he had concocted sat on a shelf in the basement of our parents' home because we were afraid if we moved it, we might blow up the house. And who could forget the cow heart generators? For Roger, nothing was off the table with people, ideas, or experiences. He was open to all. He threw caution to the wind in his emotional life. He married 5 times and mostly maintained friendly relationships with his exes. He brought 2 beautiful children into the world, a daughter, Shana, in his youth, and a son, Rajiv, in his later years. Roger and Shana were inseparable when she was small. The 2 of them took cross-country trips and enjoyed live music together. More recently, Roger spent many hours with Rajiv, reading to him, teaching him about many topics, and instilling in him a fascination for the world around him and a love of learning. He would take Rajiv on his outings around Davidson when he could, and on one of my visits, my wife and I took Roger and Rajiv to the North Carolina Zoo. I'm sure Roger wished he could have had many more such adventures with his son. Throughout his life, Roger held several jobs with various companies, but he felt too inhibited by just working on one project, so he spent most of his life in independent research where he could pick and choose which of his many ideas to work on. He continued to make an impact even after he got sick with ALS. His grit and determination to maintain a positive attitude and to continue to work on his inventions was an inspiration to all who knew him. The Davidson paper published several articles about Roger and how he handled adversity and continued to work on his inventions. Roger even did a TEDx talk in which he spoke about pursuing your dreams no matter what obstacles seem to block your path. He was well known and respected in the community. I was always amazed when we were out in town how many people knew him and took time to talk to Roger. Sometimes all the funny stories we tell about Roger obscure the real essence of who he was. He was sensitive, loving, kind, generous, and trusting. A story from childhood says a lot about Roger. Once, when Carol and Cheryl were playing behind the house at dusk, a raccoon ambled out of the dark. They ran inside and got Roger, who came out with a baseball bat. They waited for Roger to vanquish the raccoon. But when they finally poked their heads out after 10 minutes or so, they found Roger sitting on the ground and the raccoon chattering and climbing all over him. For weeks, that raccoon came back to the back door every evening for a piece of jam and bread and continued to allow Roger to play with him. Roger had a disarming way about him that charmed animals as well as people. When you went to see a movie with him, it was like hearing your own soundtrack with him. He laughed and cried so loudly that everyone else in the theater was laughing or crying too. He was full of joy, driven by an insatiable curiosity, and imbued with a fierce will to live. He refused to be defined by his illness and continued to work on his ideas, ever hopeful and optimistic, and even grateful to the very end. Since Roger died, I have heard from many of his friends wonderful stories about Roger and how they loved him and how they were inspired by him. His life was tragically shortened, but certainly not wasted. He accomplished so much and positively impacted so many people. Roger danced his way joyfully through life, literally and figuratively. We who have been privileged to have crossed paths with him will miss him for a long time. May his spirit live on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support from Dad. Literally, people from all over the world and all walks of life have reached out to me to share their stories and give condolences. It speaks volumes to the type of person my dad was. There are a million, but one of my favorite stories about my dad was when we were both living in Boston, and I was bartending at an upscale Italian restaurant called Piaggio's. This was the type of place that you took a date to impress them. White tablecloth, black tie, bottle service the whole night. I was working the bar one night, mixing a drink near the service area. My boss called me over quietly and tells me that he doesn't want me to serve the guy who just sat down at the end of the bar because he looks effing crazy. I looked over, and there's my dad sitting there with a pink and purple tie-dye shirt on, his long hair pulled up in a bun on the top of his head, and a big cheesy grin. I looked back at my boss and laughed. I said, "That's my dad." I have so many stories like this from my childhood. But one thing about my dad is he never let my embarrassment deter him from who he was. I would argue that this is the way my dad approached life. Unapologetically authentic. No fear. Take him or leave him. I always admired that ability to put himself out there without the worry of what others thought. To have an idea or an invention and just pursue it without the fear of failure. I always thought it was such a reckless way to live, but in retrospect, it was probably the most beautiful way to live. He was larger than life, Larger than life personality with a brilliant mind, a huge heart, and grand scale ideas. He was constantly thinking of ways to better the world and make things more efficient. But what I loved the most about him was his infectious optimism towards life. If I was ever feeling down and out, and he was always the first person I would call for a dose of positivity. He would compare this blind optimism to Tarzan swinging through the jungle. He leaps from the edge, swings wildly through the trees, not entirely knowing when the next vine is going to appear, but having faith that it will. And for the most part, this was accurate. That vine almost always appeared that kept him swinging through the jungle, always believing the next big break was right around the corner, and that every person he met had a good heart, and things would always work out in the end. I hope that I can honor him in that way by taking a leap and challenging my own fears. It was something he told me over and over again, and I want to instill that fierce determination in my children to always follow their dreams no matter how big. There is one song I would like to play for you. I danced with my dad to visit my wedding. I danced to it again at his wedding. And I would like to have one last dance. I love you, Dad.
if I can have your attention for just a minute. We asked people that knew Roger that for one reason or another would not be here, if they would like to share some thoughts about him. And I have several letters that I would like to read to you. The first one is a story about Roger from my younger brother, Donald. He said, I was about 20. Roger asked me, or talked me into quitting my job and spending the summer backpacking in the Sierras in California. I'd never been west of the Mississippi and had never done any real backpacking, so it was a pretty big adventure. When we were all packed and leaving, we stopped at our parents to say goodbye. As we were getting in the car, my dad said, take care of your brother. Roger said he would, and my dad said I wasn't talking to you. Anyone that knew Roger knew he came up with some half-baked ideas. Since I didn't know anything about backpacking, I left it to Roger about what we should bring. He decided we'd live off raw nuts. It would be healthy and we'd lose weight. He was half right. We had 60 pounds of raw nuts. No flavoring or salt or anything. That was bad enough, but we mixed them all together, so it always tasted the same. Back then, I didn't know anything, so I went along with it. We definitely lost weight. After a couple of days, I had to force myself to eat a handful a couple times a day. But we were deep in the mountains before we realized that the nut diet was not a good idea. We hiked for about 10 days that time, and I lost 10 pounds. When we finally got out to civilization, we hitchhiked into town and ordered a big breakfast. When we were done, we ordered lunch and had ice cream after that. Anyway, we realized we didn't need to worry about calories when backpacking. We mailed most of the nuts home and stocked up on plenty of food. I lost about 25 pounds that summer. Food was a priority at that time. I brought a telescopic fishing rod and caught a couple of small trout. As a kid, Roger would sit and study ants or other insects' behavior for hours. He was laying on his belly trying to see trout. After a while, he figured out that they hid under the cut in the shoreline. With swift waters, it was pretty common for the current to undercut the bank. Once he realized that, he started reaching under the bank and grabbing trout. He said they wouldn't spook because they couldn't see him. He would feel around till he found one and slowly get his hand around it. I tried but was never successful, but Roger was very good at it. He'd lay on his belly, and when he got one, he'd toss it back to me and I'd clean it. We ate a lot of trout that summer. We didn't make it through the summer together. We started getting on each other's nerves, so we parted ways. About halfway through the summer, him staying in California and me going up to Washington. It was definitely a turning point in my life, and I ended up moving to Washington a couple of years later. And that's my younger brother for you. My oldest sister Dorothy, she's not able to be here either. She wrote a short letter and said, what I loved about Roger was his zest for life. Always happy, rarely discouraged, no poor me attitude for him. And yet, he is the one out of the 7 siblings who had the most difficult life of all. In recent years, I looked forward to his frequent phone calls telling me about the weather, how he loved a beautiful sunny day. especially if he could be outdoors in the fresh air. He always ended his calls with, "I love you." He was so very special, and I miss him, as do countless others. May he be lying down in green pastures, resting by quiet waters, and enjoying new strength and joy, as God has promised. We love you, Roger. Happy birthday, Gerald. This next letter is from Joe Popovich, who is one of Roger's friends from Davidson. He says, Roger and I became close friends over the past 3 years, meeting nearly every week, often sharing a beer, discussing life's questions, issues, and problems. He openly shared with me whatever was occurring in his life, and I tried to do the same. We laughed and grieved over whatever was going on. He may have been the most amazing, unusual person I've ever met. I loved Roger's enthusiasm for life and for ideas of all sorts. I think nearly everything interested him, and whatever interested him, he fully analyzed, often in ways I couldn't comprehend. He was so incredibly intelligent and curious about life. Roger was so optimistic about life. I'm a Christian and came into Roger's life via a visit he made to our church, the Davidson College Presbyterian Church. So we often talked about the mystery of God and how God came into our lives. One of the things we believe is that God cares most about and is present with those who are suffering, including those with illnesses like ALS. Roger seemed to be able to feel God's blessings, as he often would say to all of us. Like all of you, I am grieving Roger's sudden death. He seemed to have a long life ahead of him, and so much more life to live for his inventive work. While he was out of my daily life, I look forward to continuing my friendship with him in various ways. Now it's gone. But I hope his work will live on, just as he so hoped, through Rethink and the many other ways he communicated with the world. I miss you, Roger. I believe you are now in some way with God, devoid of ALS or any other ailment. I hope wherever you are, your curiosity about all things remains active, and that the things you and we couldn't understand in this life are now made clear to you. With great love, Joe. Jake wanted me to read his words. This is Jake here. He was one of Roger's confidant and caretaker, just the best friend in the world to him for the last couple of years of his life. He says, Roger was the strongest person I had ever met. His ability to persevere with the load he bore was truly supernatural. The impact he made on my life is indefinable, and I'm sure many others can say the same. I am very grateful for the time we had together, and while he is no longer with us physically, I feel his spirit through the efforts of his family and community continuing his work. I'd like to encourage all of you to see this gathering as a chance to observe what living life to the fullest looks like. A lot of us are here today because Roger embraced uncertainty and sought opportunity throughout the ebbs and flows of life. Let's continue to demonstrate that behavior in our own lives. Dance on, Judas Flower Boy. At this point, I know there's some other folks out here that have some things they'd like to say, so I'd ask you to please come forward and speak. In any particular order, Carolyn, do you want to go first?
I don't know if I can be as eloquent as everybody before me, but I'm Karen. I was Roger's living caregiver for the last year and a half. And, when you live with somebody 24/7, you take care of them in the way that Roger needed to be taken care of at that time. We developed a relationship. So, I could join the course of people and attest to what an amazing, unique man Roger was. How friendly and positive and intelligent, how passionate about everything he did, and his dedication to his causes and his children. All of these things were gifts to everyone who knew him. I would like to take a minute to share a few of the gifts that Roger shared, at least with me personally, and what made our relationship dear. Roger and I were opposites in many fundamental ways. He was an extrovert with a capital E. He thrived in the spotlight. He trusted everyone implicitly, and he knew no strangers. And I was mostly the opposite. So, but we did have some things in common. Neither one of us was afraid to say what was on our minds. We both liked the same kind of music. And he even enjoyed some of the new music that I shared with him. And we both loved to dance. Some of the most joyous times was when a good song would come on, and I would take his arms and his legs and make him dance in his chair. He loved that. I cooked a great deal, and Roger came to associate me with food. He loved my cooking, and he ate everything and anything I made. He was not afraid of new foods or new dishes. Roger loved nature, and in the beginning especially, I would take him for long walks, at least until he started to see Rajiv almost every day, and then of course, that became a priority. Roger would tell me amazing stories about his life, his jobs, his wives, his girlfriends, his travels, his accomplishments that he was most proud of, so on. And he wasn't afraid to talk about his death either. How he wanted to be awkward cremated, where he wanted his ashes, what he wanted to wear in case he was buried traditionally, what music he wanted. The playlist that you guys have been listening to this evening is all Roger's music. And it was his talk about his death that gave the biggest lessons to me. Many times Roger said that he had the great privilege of nearly dying twice. Not while I was there, by the way. He said those near-death experiences allowed him the opportunity to witness his life and realize what he regretted the most. He said you never truly know what you'll think or regret until you're actually in that situation. And living through it gave him the precious chance to fix those regrets. And that was his first lesson. Find your regrets and fix them. Second lesson from Roger was about his personal life. Many times he said to me that he had done a lot of things, including, in his words, a lot of illegal things. He'd done his share of travel, made a couple differences in the world, danced a lot, loved a lot, had done what he wanted. Yes, he would have liked to see Rajiv into adulthood and shepherd his inventions further along. But in all, he said it had been a full life, and he was happy with it. What amazing lesson by example to all of us, to be able to look at the end of your life and say that it was a full life, and that you had done everything you wanted, and you were happy with it. An extraordinary gift to give to yourself and to the world. And knowing this about Roger gave me some comfort when he died. And it makes me take a new look at my own life. But perhaps the most deeply gratifying gift Roger ever gave to me were the times that he would tell me that I had given him the most productive year and a half of his life. He knew he could trust me to always be there, no matter what, and that I would always be looking out for his best interests. This was the greatest gift to give to me because I would rather be trusted over anything else. Roger always enjoyed my attempts to keep him connected to the outside world, and one of the ways that I did that was to send him pictures of places he couldn't get to anymore, especially nature in the woods, because Roger loved nature. In fact, the last text I sent to Roger was a picture of a moonrise and a description of the evening. He never got to see that text. So in closing, I'd like to read a poem I wrote for Roger that incorporates that text and other things that he won't get to see again. Roger always liked my poetry. He might be the only one. But this is dedicated to Roger, and it's called This Day. This day. This day, the morning glows purple, and 3 little birds sing, "Don't worry, be happy." No, wait, that's your music playing in my head. Working among the plants and the pans, I wonder why the plastics never dry in the dishwasher. But there's no, I can explain that from the way beyond. Soon the sky is yellow, and the day promises summer so hot. No blanket would have been needed today. At the lake shore, sun-warmed osprey nests are filled with chicks and diligent parents. Their discarded fish bones, a prize for our dog. A young boy digs in the sand while his dad watches, both waiting on fate. In the water, a ghost, swimming laps and laps around the lake. Without warning, the evening sky, your favorite, becomes a swirl of melted dreamsicles and grenadine, and then slowly fades into the blues and blacks of dusk. A great horned owl hoots. It seems a message from the gods, until a small mob of sparrows, like impatient angels, escort him away. The full moon is fuzzy and bright above the treetops as darkness overtakes the woods, and fireflies blink in Morse code. Deep among the trees, a bonfire illuminates drummers pounding out the earth rhythms and wind-waved dancers breathing in. And there I see clearly, one amongst them, a dancer, naked, high, ecstatic. It's you, not a bit tamed, sounding the barbaric bell and shouting, I am free this day and evermore. Roger, I miss you.
This could be really bad, I can tell you right now. It didn't go well at my mother-in-law's, not Roger's mom, my husband's mom. So, January 29th, 1970, is the day that Roger and I celebrated, at least I celebrated, and for a few years, that was the day that I considered we became a couple. I knew Roger since we started going to middle school together in 1967, 7th and 8th grade, we first met. And I will tell you that whenever he raised his hand in science class, there was kind of like, oh no. Now we're going to be in for, a long talk about stuff that's way over our heads. I don't even know if the teachers can understand this stuff, And then sometimes they probably thought, well, we don't have to listen to Mr. Bond for another, 15 minutes telling his lecture. So I knew right away in middle school, of course, everybody knew Roger was brilliant. But in our freshman year in high school, we had an English class together, and Mr. Gablinski assigned us extra work, just the two of us who had to do extra work for some reason. And one of the things that, high school boys generally talk about sports, fast cars, girls, but no, Roger in class, he's talking about the Indian-Pakistan War. And I'm thinking, wow, this guy's different. He really cares about the world, So, whatever advances I made, they went right over his head. In sophomore year, probably. But fortunately, the wrestlers let Roger know, hey, she likes you. This girl likes you. So that is how it started. And Roger, let's see, what do I want to say about, yes. In high school, yes, he was, very instrumental in the science club. And what else do I want to say? And he was, He also did things that, the first of things, okay, like now it's very common for students to take college classes in high school. But I don't think that happened at all back in 1970, 72 or whatever. So Roger somehow didn't go our senior year. He ended up going to Kent State our senior year. And I don't really remember how that worked out, but I knew, he took government in college, he got his credits and everything. And he did get to graduate with the class. And unfortunately, I don't know if there are any photographs of his graduation. I don't even have any photographs of my own graduation. But, anyway, we ended up falling in love and getting married. And we were young, and, my family probably wasn't too happy about that. But I don't regret it. And, So then we were married in 1973, my freshman year of college, and we decided that we were going to hike the Appalachian Trail. So Roger's mom, and Cheryl and Carol, and Roger and I, we went to Florida to visit Grandma Faulkner, and Mom dropped us off at Spruce Knob, West Virginia, on the way back from Florida. And we did some little bit of hiking. We were very unprepared for hiking. I mean, I was very unprepared for hiking, but, we read somewhat about it. We got the right equipment, but my body was definitely not ready for that. And so we did more hitchhiking than hiking. And when we found a place, and the people were so wonderful, and, back in the day, people hitchhiked and it was fine, and we went to Cedar Creek State Park, and Roger turned 19 that July 23rd. And I remember we awakened in the tent, and now I'm telling you happy birthday. So we looked for land, because that was what you did back then. You thought you were going to be a homesteader and live off the land. And we'd actually talked about, we should move to Wyoming because they have the fewest number of people per capita, but anyway, we found 26 acres in West Virginia to buy. So we bought this land. We came back to Ohio to get any kind of job we could get so we could pay our land payment. And anyway, then it was 1974, Roger was working on organic farm, Al Couch's organic farm in Hiram. And we became interested in natural foods. Al Couch was very inspiring about that, and eating healthy. And when we went out to eat at a restaurant in Warren, Ohio called Eden, it was a very simple little place. They had big slabs of trees for the tabletop. They had stumps for the base of the table. They had you sit on a stump that had some fabric over it, and there was a household kitchen, just like a kitchen stove, kitchen and refrigerator, normal things. We ate there and we left there and we thought, hey, we could do this. And, but mostly it was Roger. I mean, if Roger had not said we could do this, he was the one that could just, no worries about trying something. So we did. We started Red Radish with a partner. And that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. But there were no vegetarian restaurants in Kent. There were no vegetarian restaurants in Akron at the time. And our market research was, we went to the health food store and we said, so why didn't you guys start a vegetarian restaurant yet? And they said, well, we don't have the time, whatever. So we pursued that and we got that going. And it was a big deal. It was a big deal because some people that run the Mustard Seed, which is a really successful restaurant in Akron, they actually took cooking classes there. So, it was a big deal. Roger and I, didn't end up having a long marriage, but it was fine. It was great. It was great for what it was. I don't regret a minute of it. And Roger, in high school, I think the reason that I really fell in love with him was he was just so understanding. And I was thinking about one of my family get-togethers. I don't know, Roger wasn't there. It was my own family's get-together. And I remember one time being 16 at this family get-together, and I don't know what my family was talking about. I don't quite remember that. But I do remember being, 16 and shouting out, Roger understands me. Roger was the one who understood me, and he was very understanding. And I'm sorry that he had this difficult time. I'm sorry that I wasn't near him through this difficult time. If he had been close, I would try to be helpful as much as I could be. But anyway, I consider myself really blessed that I had the time I had with Roger. Thank you.
I don't have a funny long story. You might not be able to do it, Rob. I just want to say how I feel. My brother Roger was my hero. I don't think I could do it. He never let being paralyzed cripple him. He felt his brain was more creative and inventive than ever. The wonderful caregivers he had became his hands and his legs, and his brain was free to soar. Every morning, family and close friends received a morning text, a briefing of sorts from Roger, telling them what was going on with his inventions or pictures of him and Rajiv. I look forward to reading it every day, and I miss it terribly. It was always full of gratitude. I would read his text and feel ashamed that I dared to feel anything but thankfulness. If he felt a little down, he never allowed it to settle in. He bound right out of it, and he truly felt blessed. He was loving and made sure to call each family member at least once a week, and some siblings more than that. I told him many times that he was my hero, and I meant it from the bottom of my heart. Frankly, his courage, tenacity, and cheerfulness blew my mind. I pray that if or when I am faced with great adversity, that I remember and draw strength from the incredible way he dealt with his.
I'm Judy Matthew. I'm Roger's second wife. I'm 5. I can't attend an event like this and not say something about this man, this remarkable man. I want to just tell a little story of our first date. Roger and I met 45 years ago at Filthy McNasty's. That man loved to dance more than any man I've ever known. Even more than he liked to get married. He asked me out to dinner. We danced that night. He was dancing by himself. Because if nobody would dance with him, he was still going to dance, right? That wasn't going to stop him. So he asked me out, and I agreed. Now, the friends that I had with me that night, they thought he looked a little like Charles Manson. Not me, yeah, right? So my roommate who hadn't met him yet was a little concerned for my safety. So she wanted me to get a can of mace. It was okay, right? We couldn't really procure this can of mace, so we agreed the best option would be a can of spray deodorant. Like the worst happens, I just spray and sleep for a run. And then we also agreed that when I got to the restaurant, I would call her and kind of let her know how things looked, as he normally do. And unfortunately, when we got to the restaurant, the phone was in direct line of sight from our table, right? No cell phones, 45 minutes. So I couldn't call her. Now, the good news is she did not call the police. And I asked her later why, and she said, I could just tell he was a good guy. We came into the dorm room and met her. She knew he was a good guy. And that's just so true, isn't it? And Roger was just a huge, wonderful, big teddy bear. And I will miss him dearly, Roger. And I remember the nut story, by the way. I drove Donald and Roger to Oklahoma, and then they took the bus with the nuts. He left me a bag of those nuts. And I only got through a couple cans.
I'm Judy's husband for 35 years, and that's one of the first stories she told me about. Roger and I hit it off immediately. I think it's kind of rare for a new husband and an ex-husband to get along as well as we did. Overall,
Well, this is the world that Roger inspired, where 3X's daughter is the main babysitter for 2X's kids. Everyone is okay. And because mostly because of Roger. Yeah, he liked blackouts. That was a wonderful inspiration that Roger gave to the world. He said it all works out. Everything.
Jim Lindbergh and Fred Rogers from 2004. And I wish I'd known Roger earlier, but I finally got to meet the original exes. I've seen the last two, and they're in their places, and I finally hear about Roger's love of food too. That's one of the best things ever was to be able to feed Roger and shake my to control how fast he did. There's always I told him, I said, as long as you keep your hands and feet away from his mouth when he's eating, you're safe. He always like to eat fast, like, Roger, slow down, enjoy it. And he's like, ooh. And Roger was, I went over to Chiang Mai in 2017 meeting, and he asked, can I bring over a few vitamins? I said, sure, not a problem. I brought a little backpack, a little vein pack with me. And then I said, just order the stuff, have it go to my house. And then he comes back with this, can you bring an analytical balance with you? And all these boxes showed up at my house. My wife's like, what are these boxes? I open them up. It's not like one bottle of vitamins, it's like a whole pharmacy. So I actually got a duffel bag just for the trip to bring his stuff with me, like a 40 or 50 liter duffel bag to take through the airport security. And my wife said, you're going to get arrested, go to jail. And I said, no, it's all good. It's all vitamins. They're all still sealed up, And I remember I was in Bangkok and going through security, and the guys looking through my stuff. I got like a shirt, a pair of sandals there. That's all I brought with me, a water filter. And here's Roger's duffel bag. He's going through it, and it's like vitamins, and pulls up this 1 kilogram bag, white powder. He's like, what's this? And I said, it's soap. It's monoline from coconuts, and Roger's like, oh, that's illegal, and I'm like, oh, that's good to know. But it's like this guinea pig. I'm like, I trusted Roger. Like, whatever you want, I'll bring with you. And they're like, where are you staying? I'm like, I didn't know Roger's address. I know he lives in Chiang Mai. I'll contact him when I get there. And so I'm going through my Kindle, like, there's going to be an address in here for a hotel. Like, there it is. The guy from Chiang Mai. I wrote down a hotel name, and I got through security, no problem. Got the next plane, and I could meet Roger and then for Rajit, for a couple of weeks. But Roger was always been a great inventor. He was a great inspiration for me. And we did a lot of patents together, a lot of ideas. And Roger always liked to, he had this morning coffee, making his coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning. He's like, I love having conversations now. We can go into details about all his inventions he wants to do. And I'd make him another pot of coffee. I'm like, Roger, here's your second pot of coffee, a big cup. I said, I gotta go out running. I'll be back in a few hours, run on the city or something like that. And I come back, and it's still typing away and thinking of more inventions than ever. It's like it's constantly thinking. And I remember a few years back, I think it was like 2015 or something. He wanted me to do an experiment for him, and I'm like, he gives me this huge matrix to do for solutions. I'm like, Roger, I don't think you can do this. I don't have the solutions. I don't have the money to buy the solutions. You don't have the money, and the investors don't have the money. So basically, we're not going to do it. So he's like, wow, we got to get this done. I said, this is the list of what we have. We'll work with that. He didn't like that at first because we took this big matrix that would have taken like a month to do, and we had it down to like a couple of days now. He's like, oh, that's all the information you have? I'm like, yeah, just look at information, Be grateful for that. But he always wanted lots of numbers. He's a numbers guy, crunching numbers. And that was like his dream, I think, just, sit there and just crunch numbers to figure out what it meant. And I'm like, well, what if it doesn't mean anything? It's just numbers and symbols. And but it was always good. We always we spoke every week. He called. Sometimes I'd be able to talk to him in the lab. And even today, I have a whole pile of failed experiments and ideas of Roger's. Bins and bins of it. It's like, this idea was great, Roger, but we can make it in a small scale, but we can't make it in a big scale. There's no way to pump this stuff. It's like, it's not going to work. It's like, oh, let's try this. It's not going to work. Up or down, And then there's other inventions that, it's you keep going with more ideas, and Roger's, still trying to push in this 5 cents, like what to use for silicone for the tubing, I'm like, well, let's just use roofing compound, it's much easier. You can just brush it on. And I made a video of my daughter, we're making the tubing for the vests. And I'm like, this, I had her put the jacket on. She wants to become a chemical engineer now. But we're just making the tubes and cranking out production for that. And it was fun to work on things with Roger. It's always, what are you going to do next? It's like, what's he thinking of next? And you're not even done with one project, and he already has 10 more lined up. It's like, slow down. Let's do this one, one step at a time. Get it to market, at least sell it. And make that money. But it wasn't always about. Actually, I think with Roger and myself, there's never the concept of money was never really there. I always had somebody else do the money for me, but Roger was always, that was part of the problem. You get involved with the money, and somebody else should handle it for him. But and like he asked, he goes, well, what do you want? They got to pay you, so I'm like, don't worry about it, Roger. I don't want any money. It's just my own time. I'll do whatever you want. I'll work in my schedule. So it always worked out, pretty well that way. I never asked for a dime. I said, I'll just come down and just let me stay there, for a couple of days here and there. And, that's enough payment for me, But I miss Roger. I miss the conversations with coffee with Roger. I miss those times, or even this, just random phone calls. He'd call me if I'd be either just in cell phone range or text range, and he's like, can you get back to me? Give me a call back? And it's like, sure. And I'd be, I'm on the road running or walking someplace, and I'd just be, coming along and like just talking to him, And I think that was the most enjoyable part of Roger, was just to sit and talk with him, It wasn't always about inventions or making things. He'd call me up and ask about this and that. I'm like, okay, let's do this and don't worry about these other things. Just go with the flow and enjoy life. Life's very short. But always with Roger though, we had a lot of fun when he was in Cambridge, New York. We'd always go out for like wings and beer. We had this good place. This 5-cent wings. And we'd take Roger there, and they had the refillable beers. So it's like $15 you get the mug, and it was unlimited beer. So we had to give him a ride back to Cambridge too. So my wife would complain about that because she was my designated driver at the time. So, but I'm like, yeah, it's and but it was always good. In every place in Cambridge, I think all the restaurants that go to London too, because they always had a tab for every restaurant. And I'm like, how do you know these people at the restaurants? And he's like, let's go out to eat. I'm like, you sure you can afford this, buddy? And they'd always make them special breads, special meals. They're not even on the menu. And we just like walk in and say, they know Roger. They know Roger. And no matter what restaurant you went into, it's like, how do you know these people? You've only been here like 3 months. But no, he loved this food. And I remember, especially in Chiang Mai, he wanted me to go out and get him mushrooms and green curry. There's this garage down the street where we lived, and it was a garage. There's, 2 walls, 2 are open, a lot of soot in the back, kitchen's over here, and he always liked this green curry mushroom. And I bring it back, and he's like, this is, something you can't have. I'm like, why is that? He goes, this is too hot for you. I'm like, oh, it can't be that bad. And it was. So, like, Roger didn't understand why he liked this stuff. But, so I think it would dissolve the spoon. You had a spoon, but it's chopsticks only. But I'd push him around there, and we'd go to coffee shops, and or in the morning I'd go out and I'd find restaurants in the inner city that were wheelchair accessible. And we take out the Jeep if you wanted to take out sushi, French fries. I found a Carvel ice cream store, in Middle Asia. It's like someplace, we went there just to get sundaes, one day. And that was like the best thing ever for Roger. He was like in heaven. Finding real ice cream, that's all we ate there. It was all stainless steel inside. So I thought this thing, this air conditioned. One of the few places, in the city with air conditioning. But I miss Roger quite a bit. The man that always had something on his mind, another direction, next best thing, but it'll keep going, I'm sure. So.
Shana, if nobody else wants to speak, you want to tell us what we've gone through here?
Yeah, let's get the music back going. And I know some of you had joined a little bit later and maybe hadn't got a chance to see some of the albums and the pictures up here. Let's just, if nobody else wants to speak, let's just start. If you have a memory and you don't want to speak to the chair, you can write it on the card, and I'll just keep that for myself. With my kids,
I'm signing off. You want to say goodbye?
thank you, everybody.